Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you again for following the show. For those that are following us on our live streaming Facebook, thank you for continuing to do that. Love the feedback and the cooperation. Our focus is always the same. It's been the same almost 8 years now on the radio and in podcasting, and that is the objective is to help you, the consumer, make wise decisions in and around your real estate. However, we've branched out a little bit, as you know, over recently the last several months, and we are bringing in experts in different areas. Jack Russo has been kind enough to spend some time. We're doing an ongoing series, really just something new happening in Silicon Valley. The focus is entrepreneurship, starting companies. We've taken you through the last couple of months, really every bit of that, most of it, how to start a company, how to raise money, who to bring in. We've really touched on a lot of different areas. We'll continue to do that, but we're going to talk about a little something different today. So before we do that, I'll bring in Jack Russo. Jack, good to have you again today.
Hey, hi, Joe. Thanks for doing this by the conferencing system. That's going to save me a couple of hours of driving up and down 101. I appreciate that.
Wear and tear, and the quality of sound's good, and we hope that we can make the best use of technology. So we'll continue to do that, and we could bring Jack from wherever he is located into the show. And so before we get started, Jack, maybe if you can, for the benefit of the listeners and maybe just tuning in for the first time, if you could give us a quick background, that'd be great. I know a little bit about your firm.
Right, sure. I've been the managing partner of Computer Law Group for over 3 decades. We've been here in Palo Alto, California, downtown Palo Alto, a block from the Apple Store. The Apple Store seems to be the center of gravity now for Palo Alto, California. It's a beautiful store. It's all glass. It's gorgeous. And we're just 1 block away from it. We're in our own building here. We've been here for the last, it seems like it's more than 3 decades, but it's certainly 3 decades. And I've been practicing law for almost 4 decades. And the focus is typically startups, but we also represent growth companies and also individuals and entrepreneurs, and sometimes even people with real estate problems. They get into litigation problems because a lot of the law firm handles dispute resolution, which is the topic today.
Yeah, absolutely. Today we're going to talk about disputes and dispute resolution and negotiation versus a number of different mediation, I should say, and arbitration. There's a couple of different things, and I'm going to have Jack break those down because as you talk about them, I think they kind of roll off someone's tongue when they talk about them. But maybe if you could first, Jack, take us through the differences and what those mean.
Right. So unfortunately, humans get into disagreements.
Right.
The better of us have figured out ways to avoid the court system, or what's now becoming a private adjudication system available through mediators and arbitrators and others that are sometimes known as facilitators. I myself have been a court-appointed mediator, court-appointed arbitrator, court-appointed facilitator, and I'll talk about those in turn. But the best advice that you'll get, you may not get it from a lawyer, but you're going to get it from me, is you want to avoid, if you can, getting into the court system or even into the private adjudication system by figuring out ways to avoid or minimize the risk of disputes. Mm-hmm. And that's something everyone has to do, not just startup entrepreneurs, not just the people we've been talking about who are building a business. Anyone in life or business can lose a lot, not only of money, but sleep and time and creative attention, and even it can have dire physical consequences, because I've seen people get sick over worry about litigation. So thinking about how to become better at avoiding or anticipating disputes is probably the best advice you're ever going to get. As my grandmother used to say, a good year is one where you stay out of the hospital and you stay out of the courthouse.
So we talked about this, Jack. So I'm guessing, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm guessing, though, this all starts with very, very good documentation, contracts, agreements. If we're talking about business of any sort. So this is kind of where it all begins.
Yeah, it all begins really with making sure you're doing business with the right people. I'd even start before you get the paperwork. Right. You have to evaluate the bona fides and trustworthiness of whoever you're dealing with. I mean, I could tell story upon story of misjudgments that people make about people and what happens as a result of them, and then what happens to the course of their investment or the course of their business or their course of their life. Now, of course, we often start with the view that some people find hard to believe, but in California and elsewhere, even in Europe, the divorce rates are climbing above 50%. So even in something as sacred as marriage, we're not seeing a lot of longevity. And that doesn't mean all of those divorces were nasty or terrible, but certainly a pretty large percentage of them take a lot out of the individuals that are involved. We don't do divorce cases, although occasionally I have acted as a mediator in a very high net worth divorce, in a number of very high net worth divorce cases. I'm not here pitching that service, but I'm here to say, in general, if you can imagine trying to anticipate being with the right person or doing business with the right people, that's usually the best first step to avoiding a dispute.
Yeah, that's well said. So even before the contracts, the wording, the agreements, what you're saying is make sure or do the best job you can at facilitating, evaluating your partners and who you choose to do business with.
Well, you know, Joe, I'll give you an example, and it shocks some of my friends. I, of course, have many friends now that are getting older, and in some cases, like my own case, a previous marital partner ends up dying young, and so people are dying too. Right. And then you're out there trying to meet new people, and of course, people are using all these online systems to do it. In fact, Facebook just announced this week.
I saw that.
It just about destroyed the Match.com stock price because Facebook makes an announcement they're going to get into the dating game and they're going to get into the matching game. And so what people don't realize is everyone's got a set of baggage behind them, and they're not necessarily going to tell you on the first, second, or third date, oh, did I fail to mention that I've been in personal bankruptcy, or I'm going through a personal bankruptcy now, or there's a few lawsuits that are following me. And think about Bernie Madoff. I mean, that guy probably didn't disclose a ton of stuff to his wife over the course of their entire marriage.
Yeah, right. No, that's a good point. So it's so important before you get into this, you do the best you can, choose the right partner, the right business partner, and this even goes even deeper when we're talking about business, Jack, right? Because now you're talking about investors, which is a whole different thing. It's one thing for a marriage. It's one thing if you start a law firm with a partner. But then if you take on investors that give you money to do something, these are partners too, in a sense, right?
They are partners. And I like to say to people, it's not a bad idea to run some really inexpensive searches and see whether the individual has been in litigation, in bankruptcy, in a number of scenarios that might surprise you. And, you know, people think they can just run a Google search, but you can pay for much deeper searches that give you much more fertile information about who you're dealing with. And I'm not saying you stop and you judge a person totally by what the past may write about them. Look, I mean, even Elon Musk has some real negative history in his background. Not super negative, but it's not exactly perfectly positive. But at the end of the day, you really want to check what's available so that you can make sure that the person that you're talking to is what he or she represents he or she is. That's the first step. Now, the second step is you really do want to do your paperwork right. And you really do want to make sure that the paperwork itself anticipates that there might be a dispute. So we like to put in our paperwork that we do a process that'll keep you out of court. And usually the process that you see has 2 or 3 steps to it. I like to put in even the steps that the parties will get together face to face in confidence to see if they can work out an agreement. Because instead of just immediately going to lawyers, you can go through the phase that I call negotiation, which everyone needs to become better at, because it's really how we as humans help determine our own fate. It's how we use principles of self-determination to decide a way to resolve a disagreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well said. So how does that versus the negotiation skills are important. Get those, or at least have those. Now, you talked a little bit about mediation. Do people there, you hear this about, you touched a little bit on this too, Jack, on business, but you hear this mediation, you hear a lot of people, instead of, hiring, maybe cooler minds prevail in a divorce situation or partnerships, they'll get mediation of some sorts and arbitration, and instead of going through a long drawn out battle and with court and attorneys and all that.
Right. You could think of it as, if the negotiation fails. I had a case this week. It's a husband and wife. They started a business. It grew tremendously successfully. And now they don't see eye to eye, either in the business or in their personal life. And of course, they have kids and a house together and a business together and a host of cars and other equipment. And I'm not there to do the divorce work, but frankly, they're calling me to say, we need some help to figure out whether we're going to stay in the business if we get divorced, because maybe we can be better business partners without being marital partners.
Yeah.
And although that may sound unthinkable, the modern approach would investigate through, if he can't do it face to face because there's just too much emotion there, a mediator can sometimes step in as a totally neutral party and use some skill, both legal skill as well as negotiation skill, to diplomatically aid one party or the other in figuring out whether something that they both think is otherwise unthinkable can work. Because remember, in this business, there are investors. They want to see the business succeed regardless of whether the marriage succeeds or not. They actually voted on the two of them as business partners.
Right, because
as marital partners.
Well, yeah, if you're reasonable, or if hopefully you are in a situation like that you described, even though unfortunately if the marriage doesn't go the right way, they both still have to make a living. They have to make a living. They have to make a living. They have to pay their mortgage. They have to pay their taxes. They've got car payments. They've got private school. I mean, think about it. This is why a lot of investors won't invest, or won't readily invest, I should say, because there are some great counterexamples in a husband, wife, or marital partner, or civil, gay couple, lesbian couple partnership, because their fear is you may split up, and then you may use the business as a way to hurt each other, and you may hurt the business as a result. Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that. All right, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break, and we will come back in about a minute. We're going to continue conversation with Jack Russo of the Computer Law Group. Again, we do this once a week if we can. Jack is calling in today from the offices in Palo Alto. We're talking about disputes and dispute resolution, negotiation, and much, much more. This is Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Stick with us. Stay with us. They're on Facebook. We'll be back in a minute. We'll continue the show.
Yeah, so Joe, now you've got a good answer to your wife if she ever decides that she wants to be part of your business. You can say, no, honey, the investors don't want to take that risk.
Believe me, I brought it up to everybody and they said, no, absolutely not. Keep her out of there. That's what they told me.
I mean, even if it's a great individual, the truth is, as you know from the first show, my mom and dad were in business together, and they had huge differences on just about every subject you can imagine, but they made it work.
Yeah.
And they worked together for probably at least 40 or 50 years. I mean, literally, they had a long-term marriage. I mean, my dad died a couple of years ago. My mom is still alive. But they stayed together both in marriage and in business right to the bitter end.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's something else. And actually, a lot of those are similar when you think about it. I mean, I know a lot of people don't, when they're young and they don't understand that, but a marriage is a partnership. I mean, it's more that's you got to talk about responsibilities, what you're good at, what you're not good at, right? I mean, there's a lot of that's like a business.
Well, there are a lot of kids that get together. I call them kids. They're young adults, and they don't want to get married. And you ask them why, and they say it's too complicated to get divorced. And they say we would rather just be in some sort of loose relationship until we figure out whether we can actually live with each other. Well,
Right.
how long may that take? I don't know. Maybe after the first 3 or 4 kids, try to avoid the kids being confused in first grade kind of thing. It's pretty funny.
Here's my strategy. I'm going to work part-time. I'm going to just bounce around to the Airbnb locations, and I'm going to date and not commit. There you go.
Well, there are people that do that.
I know.
It's not that far-fetched.
That's right. All right. I hope I didn't offend anybody by saying that. I don't think so, right? We're an equal opportunity employer.
You work several jobs full time, Joe. So you're not going to be that kind of beach bum, but there are people like that.
All right, Ron, you ready to get going again? All right. Welcome back in, Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you again for tuning in today. As always, we appreciate your cooperation. The show continues to grow, almost 8 years now. It's very, very exciting to not only to know that we're reaching thousands and thousands of more people, but now, we have some exciting new topics. Jack Russo's with us weekly, if we can, based on the schedules, talking about something new in Silicon Valley. Jack is educating our audience on a many different levels in entrepreneurship, startups, what to do, A to Z. There's so much involved. If you think there's a lot involved with real estate, let me tell you, when you talk about startups and all the different things that go along with it, it's amazing. And today's topic is the dispute resolution. Jack's talking about negotiation, mediation, arbitration we're going to get into, but a lot of those topics. So, Jack, I think when we left off on the break, I think we were giving some examples about bringing people in on the mediation side or arbitration versus automatically just throwing your hands up and saying, we're each going to get an attorney and we'll see how this works out, right?
I like to say to clients, you have far more choices than you might otherwise believe and that you might otherwise even be told. And one right off the bat is sit down in a quiet place with a sheet of paper between you and just try to list what the interests are. Like if the kids are certainly part of the story, in the example I gave of the husband and wife running a business that's been immensely successful. The business is worth tens of millions of dollars, maybe over $100 million. And there's a lot of value there that you don't want to destroy. And you also want to make sure that people are taken care of, that the kids are taken care of, and that the house doesn't end up going into foreclosure. But in business too, obviously, there are partner issues, there are investor issues, there are employee issues. The California Supreme Court just this week changed the rules about who is an independent contractor, or at least clarified. Mm-hmm. And it might be that all the Uber drivers and all the Lyft drivers are now employees of those companies. That was a big decision.
That's a big deal.
It affects all of us.
Yeah.
It affects anyone that uses independent contractor talent that they believe they can issue a 1099 type of payment to. So it's something that everyone needs to be aware of. And of course, when there are disputes about that, they typically should get resolved without litigation in whatever negotiated way they can. When negotiations fail, you get to mediation.
Yeah.
As a choice, if you can get there, because it is voluntary and is by agreement. But what most people don't realize is the courts require you to go through a non-binding mediation process before the courts will give you a trial date.
Okay.
At least in California, both in the federal and state courts, when you file a lawsuit, with very few exceptions, both the federal and state court will require that you go through some alternative dispute resolution process like mediation, typically mediation. It could be something else. It could be facilitation, which is a little bit less legal and a little bit more, let's try to negotiate this, but with maybe even a non-lawyer facilitator. Most mediators are lawyers, as are most arbitrators. And the difference between mediation and arbitration is the arbitrator has the power to issue a decision that will be viewed as binding unless the parties somehow put in their contract that they can opt out of it. So the typical approach is, and think of it as a spectrum. Negotiation and facilitation is totally about discussion and resolution. As you move from mediation to arbitration, you're transitioning the power of self-determination between the two competing parties, the two disputants, the two parties in disagreement, to the third party, ultimately to a judge, or ultimately to a jury, or ultimately to an appellate court. So think of it as mediation is non-binding, but arbitration is typically binding. And arbitration typically, because it's binding, there are many more procedural rules that have to be followed so that there's actual evidence that the arbitrator has to look at and has to consider all of the evidence, which is why sometimes arbitrations end up taking far longer and costing far more money than a mediation. In mediation, the couple can come in with essentially their suitcase full of documents, throw it on the table, and say to the mediator, sit down with this stuff and us and work out a decision that will result in a settlement. And that will be binding and effective. In arbitration, they have to actually organize those documents in a way that presents their respective cases.
Got it. Before we move into litigation, Jack, again, I'd like to give the listeners, if you would, obviously right now we're live, but then this is a podcast and thousands of people listen to that. If someone wants your advice, wants to contact your firm, wants to talk about your services, what's the best way to reach you for any of these things?
So easiest way would be by email, which is jrusso, JRUSSO @computerlaw.com. It does come up on your screen every so often. You'll see it during the show, but you could also reach us at 650-327-9800. Our offices are in Palo Alto. We're happy. We typically are happy to have people actually show up in person. I know there are some lawyers that are completely virtual. We've certainly not gotten there. We're very much traditional in the sense that we believe in physical offices. We own our own building in Palo Alto. It's been here. It's the oldest original church of Palo Alto, the first Christian church. It's a historic building that we bought and renovated over 30 years ago, or close to 30 years ago.
You guys get rid of all the pews? Or it's
actually the yoga center that was here ahead of us got rid of the pews. It was kind of funny. The church, I guess, failed to continue as a church or move somewhere, and it was used as a yoga studio for a number of years in Palo Alto. So it's got quite some interesting history.
Isn't it amazing? Yeah, we don't want to get into that on this show, but isn't it amazing if that yoga studio or the instructors would have known what that building was worth 40 years ago?
Oh yeah, it was it's a classic example of, if you looked at it back then, you'd say, who would want to buy that place? And just as a footnote to the story, recently I saw another building. It wasn't a historic building, but it was totally rotten. And when I opened the door, it smelled like some rats had died in the basement. And I thought, no, there's no way I'm going to buy this building or try to buy this building and renovate it. And my wife reminded me, well, this is exactly why this building hasn't sold and why it's a bargain. So get used to it. I mean, that's what you have to be ready for if you deal in real estate, right?
That's true. That's absolutely. Got to have the vision.
Right.
Well, what 5 or 6 minutes left here, I think we have. Let's talk a little bit about litigation now, so we get to that point.
Right. So typically, if the case can't be negotiated, it can't be facilitated, it can't be mediated, and people don't think that arbitration is going to work, or they think somehow that there's going to be some unfairness, or they think it's too complicated even for a single arbitrator. If it's too complicated for a single good retired judge or a retired lawyer or even active lawyer arbitrator, why would you think it's not going to be too sophisticated for an active judge with a jury that's not necessarily going to know more? But there are people that want full due process, and they want to be heard by a jury, and they want to tell their story in state court, 12 members, in federal court, usually 6, and maybe 1 or 2 alternates. So it might be as many as 8. There are different rules in federal and state court. We could talk about that at some point, but basically you get the community. In this case, if a case is in Santa Clara County, the community is in San Jose. both federal and state court. Okay. If the case is in San Mateo County, then it's in state court. If it's in state court, it's in Redwood City. If it's in San Francisco, or if it's in federal court, it's going to be in San Francisco. Or if it's a case in San Francisco, it's going to be San Francisco state or federal court. Those courts have different types of jurors, different demographics, different wealth or non-wealth profiles. And you're going to get that community to decide who's telling the truth. And sometimes there are battles like that have to be decided by a judge or a jury in a full trial. The typical cost of a jury trial in California is 6 figures.
Wow.
Unless you have a lawyer that really can figure out a way to streamline proceedings, it's very hard to imagine a civil case costing less than $100,000. So arbitrations are typically 1/3 of the cost of litigation. So if you were going to spend $100,000 on a full trial in front of a jury, you probably would spend less than $33,000 in front of a good arbitrator. Arbitrators charge their fees. You're going to pay legal fees as well. Obviously, those are real costs, but typically the savings in time and money are substantial. Mediation is typically 1/3 of the cost of arbitration. Now, these are rough rules of thumb, but if you're going to spend $33,000 for an arbitrator, you might spend under $11,000, maybe even under $10,000 for a mediator, particularly in a very well-organized mediation. But let's take the last choice, facilitation, maybe even negotiation. That could be zero. You could get a friend to facilitate and no charge. And if the person is good at getting people together, you might be able to accomplish something over a couple of beers or a couple of glasses of wine over a 2 or 3 hour period.
Yeah, that's a good point. People are reasonable and they have cool minds and they just want to, they understand. They're both, come in and they're reasonable. I guess, do you have, it's probably hard to say how many the percentage wise, but what is your experience or what are you, does a lot of this get taken care of before it gets to litigation, or is it just a percentage, or is it depend and just there's a little bit for everybody here?
So the courts have published statistics that say over 95% of civil cases eventually get settled.
Okay.
That means only 1 in 20, and some people are saying that 1 in 20 number is going to maybe 1 in 30, maybe soon 1 in 40, actually go to trial. Now, lots of other dispositions can happen in a courthouse other than settlement. There can be what's called a summary judgment, which is a judge decision that the evidence is not sufficient, or what's called an early motion to dismiss, meaning that legally the case has no basis to be filed to begin with. But still, the cost even to get to those dispositions is pretty high.
Right.
So for a lot of people, even the risk of having to pay for a fraction of the legal fees and costs are just a little too high to justify going to court. So it really does turn out to be the special exceptional cases that ever get filed, and certainly the super exceptional cases that ever actually get in front of a jury.
Right. Okay. Well, good. Well, we're just about out of time, but as we're talking about this, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you. We don't have time today, but I'd love to talk to you about the kind of the innovation and evolution of, so where is law going? Where is it now and where is it going in the future? Every expert I have on, I love to ask them, how is technology changing your industry, your business, your job? That'd be a good show to do. Kind of figure out, is it changing?
It is, and it's a good separate show to do, and it's probably a good separate show to do right in your studio and plug into your display some of the innovations. But just to give a teaser as to what's there, right now there are people who are saying, look, if each disputant, each person that has a competing position in the litigation, and sometimes there's more than two, but let's just take the usual case of a plaintiff and a defendant. If each such person does a 5 to 10 minute video of what they would testify to about what occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And they would allow those videos to go out to as many as perhaps 100 mock jurors.
Interesting.
So imagine you have a dispute.
Right.
I'm going to make this up. It's not a true case. You
Sure.
have a dispute with one of your partners, one of your investors, somebody, and you say, look, here's my version of what happened. That person didn't complete their investment. I have paperwork that says they forfeit their investment. I'm making this all up. It's not an actual case. And the other person says, wait a minute, I was led to believe that if I gave this down payment and decided that I didn't want to complete the investment, I'd get all the money back and with interest. And I've got an email that says that. And you have a contract that's signed with that person saying, no, there's a forfeiture. There would be a way, and based on technology, to get even 100 retired lawyers, retired judges, if the point is we need to know how most people would decide this case without spending a lot of money in the fight. Now, a lot of people would just make a deal and compromise a number and get to a compromise number. But there are people, if the numbers are big enough, that would say, no, you didn't complete the investment. You caused me a lot of damage. I'm not arguing about the damage, but there is a forfeiture provision in the contract. That email was before we signed the contract. That was a different deal. It wasn't the deal we made. And you give it to those people and you get back an actual answer, and they'll keep it all in confidence. And this is what's called the mock trial system. Using essentially people who do this work for free under systems that Amazon and others provide in the gig economy that we have today. Those 100 people might charge like $10, $15 to just quickly review your videos and give their sense of what should happen.
Yeah. Well, as we duck out today, I could see it now. I'm laughing because I'm seeing this button on Amazon when you log on and you see this button that says press here for litigation.
It's going that way, Joe. I mean, it's going in that direction. But imagine, just to make the point, imagine you and your partner sit down and you watch your respective videos.
Right.
And then you look at the results from a survey tab point of view that says 94% of the people we surveyed all said the money is forfeited. Wouldn't that be persuasive evidence to say, look, for the $10,000 you invested, I'm going to give you back $600 because the estimated likelihood here is 94% of the time you're going to lose. You might have a lottery ticket with the right jury 6% of the time, but I'm just going to take that number. And you could write an agreement in mediation that says we'll live with that outcome. We'll live with the outcome of what those jurors say from a percentage point of view. That's a binding agreement. You can make that binding agreement. And you could save a lot more money getting to a resolution that way than necessarily grinding through the system. So it's going to happen for a certain class of cases. It seems inevitable to me.
I just asked Jack Russo a simple question. See, he has it laid out already. So that is more than a teaser. That gave you a little kind of a open window to what we're going to be talking about in the future.
We should definitely cover it because it's a whole new area that's emerging.
Very good stuff. Jack, thanks again. Great show. Look forward to having you back next week.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Okay, take care.
Have a good afternoon.
This is Joe Kuchar with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for tuning in today. For those that are streaming live on Facebook, and once again, for more information, you could go to reradiolive.com. Until next time, take care.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Jack. Good show.